The official narrative is a ghost story, a sequence of distractions designed to keep you staring at interest rate hikes while the actual floor of the global economy is being ripped out from under your feet. They told us de-dollarization was a slow burn. They said it was a decade away, but the math just hit a terminal velocity that nobody in Washington is allowed to talk about. The Kazan Financial Protocol isn't just a document, it's a death certificate for the era of paper promises. While the mainstream media is busy dissecting retail sales or the latest political theater, the BRICS bloc has quietly finalized the unit. And this isn't some digital toy or a speculative coin. It is a hard-anchored, gold-collateralized trap. The discrepancy between the everything is fine briefing and the digital ledger is staggering. The official line claims the dollar is the only game in town because of liquidity, but the raw trade data from the last 60 days shows a massive coordinated migration. We're seeing oil shipments from the UAE and Iran bypass the Western banking system entirely, settled in units that are 40% physical gold by weight. Do you realize what that means? For 80 years, the dollar's value was backed by faith and credit, which is just a polite way of saying debt and military might. But the unit? It's backed by 40 grams of gold per 100-unit increment, plus a basket of the most powerful emerging currencies on the planet. This isn't just a technical shift. It's a structural imprisonment of the 99%. While the golden elite, the central bankers in Moscow, Beijing, and New Delhi, are hoarding physical bullion at the highest rates in human history, they're leaving the rest of the world holding a currency that has nowhere to go but down. If you're sitting on dollar-denominated savings, you're effectively trapped in a room where the oxygen is being pumped out to fuel the new system. The dollar is being forced into a feedback loop of debasement because it no longer has the oil trade monopoly to hide its inflation. The mechanism they've built is terrifyingly efficient. It uses a permissioned blockchain. Think of it as a financial dark fiber network where every transaction is instant, invisible to SWIFT, and completely immune to sanctions. It's a parallel reality. The Unit Foundation just appointed an AI-led governance model to remove human interference, which is code for making it impossible for the U.S. Treasury to pick up the phone and stop a transaction. They've built a cage for the old system, and the door just clicked shut. But here's the part they really don't want you to see: the hidden multiplier inside the Kazan Protocol that makes this transition irreversible. It's not just about the gold. It's about a specific clause in the ledger that changes how every commodity on Earth is priced starting next month. To understand this crash, you have to process the sheer audacity of what happened in the mid-2010s compared to the silent weapons being deployed now. For decades, the global financial system operated on a gentleman's agreement. We pretended the dollar was as good as gold, and in exchange, the U.S. provided the plumbing, the SWIFT system, the legal framework, and the military protection for the sea lanes that carry our energy. But that agreement didn't just break. It was dismantled piece by the very people who built it. When the West decided to freeze $300 billion of Russian sovereign reserves in 2022, they didn't just punish a nation, they committed a form of institutional suicide. They proved to every central bank from Brasilia to Jakarta that money in a Western bank isn't actually yours. It's a permission-based entry on a ledger that can be deleted with a single stroke of a pen in D.C. The golden elite within the BRICS bloc didn't panic. They got to work. The Kazan Financial Protocol is the culmination of a decade of observing Western overreach. The standard argument from the skeptics, the ones still clinging to their Ivy League textbooks, is that the unit can't work because nobody trusts Russia or China. But that argument is a relic. It's based on the idea that you need to trust the person on the other side of the trade. The Kazan Protocol replaces human trust with math trust. When you settle an oil trade in units, you aren't trusting the diplomat, you're trusting an immutable blockchain ledger backed by physical bullion stored in neutral vaults. Logic dictates that a nation would rather trust a transparent, gold-anchored algorithm than a foreign treasury department that has already proven it will weaponize its currency to settle political scores. Now, translate that into your daily reality, because this isn't some abstract debate for billionaires. When that global trade index shifts, it doesn't just mean a red line on a Bloomberg terminal. It means the export inflation valve is shut off. For 40 years, the U.S. was able to print trillions of dollars and ship them overseas to buy cheap goods. Those countries held those dollars because they had to buy oil in them. They effectively absorbed our inflation. But if the oil trade monopoly collapses, and the data says it's already happening, those trillions of dollars have nowhere to go. They start flooding back to the domestic economy. This is why your grocery bill is doubling while the official inflation numbers look stable. The shelf space in your local store is the final destination for decades of reckless monetary policy that no longer has a global sink to hide in. The easy fix the politicians are promising, it's a fairy tale. They tell you that we can just reshore manufacturing or raise taxes to stabilize the currency. But you can't reshore an entire industrial base in a weekend, and you can't tax your way out of a $35 trillion debt hole when the global demand for your debt is evaporating. The Kazan Protocol effectively puts the dollar into a liquidity trap. If the Fed raises rates to save the dollar, they crush the U.S. economy under the weight of interest payments. If they lower rates to save the economy, the dollar gets abandoned even faster for the gold-backed unit. It's a checkmate move that's been in the works since 2015, and we're just now reaching the endgame where the 99% realizes they're the ones paying the bill for the elite's hubris. The math is breaking. It's messy. If you want to understand how the unit actually functions, you have to stop thinking about it like a currency and start seeing it as a financial escape hatch. Imagine you're in a high-stakes casino, one that's been running for 80 years. For decades, the house has forced everyone to play with the same plastic chips, the dollar. The catch? The house keeps printing more chips for itself, diluting your winnings, and if you win too much or question the management, they simply confiscate your stack and kick you out. That is the SWIFT system. Now imagine a group of the biggest players in the back room, the BRICS nations, quietly decided to build their own table, but instead of using plastic chips that the house can freeze or devalue, they're using physical gold bars and a digital ledger that no single manager can touch. That is the mechanism of the unit. The analogy of a rigged casino is the only way to feel the weight of this. When you use the old system, you're trapped in a counterparty risk loop. You aren't just holding money, you're holding a promise from the U.S. government. The unit breaks that loop because it's a fractal node-based model. Each participating nation, Russia, China, India, Iran, the UAE, holds a local replica of the reserve basket. There is no central vault for a drone to target or a regulator to subpoena. It's decentralized collateral. If the UAE sends 1,000 units to China for oil, the blockchain doesn't just send a message saying, "Pay him later." It validates the transfer of a tokenized claim on 40% physical gold and 60% of a sovereign currency basket, instantly. I know, it sounds impossible. We've been told for so long that the dollar is gravity, that it's a law of physics, but gravity doesn't have a $35 trillion debt baggage. The decision makers in the West are currently trapped by their own math. Think of it like a failing engine on a massive ship. To keep the ship moving, the economy, they have to keep pouring in fuel, debt. But the fuel lines are leaking and the friction, inflation, is melting the pistons. They can't stop the engine without the ship sinking, and they can't fix it without stopping it. The BRICS alliance isn't trying to fix the engine. They're building a life raft and calling it a sovereign vessel. The Kazan Financial Protocol is the instruction manual for the life raft. The domino effect here is inevitable. A leads to B. Oil producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE begin accepting units because they want an asset that doesn't lose 7% of its value every year. B leads to C. Once the world's energy, the literal lifeblood of civilization, is priced in units, the global demand for dollars for petrodollar recycling evaporates. C leads to D. The trillions of dollars currently held in foreign central banks as reserves suddenly become toxic waste. When that happens, those dollars don't just vanish, they come home. They flood the U.S. domestic market like a tidal wave hitting a coastline. We are talking about a sequence of events where the transition from world reserve to local fiat happens not over decades, but over a few chaotic fiscal quarters. The empathy trap here is that the people running the show in DC aren't necessarily evil. They're just mathematically cornered. They're operating on a 1944 software in a 2025 hardware world. They can't imagine a world where they're not the house, but the backroom players have already cashed out their chips and are moving to the gold table. The ugly truth is that we aren't looking at a market correction. We are looking at a regime change. The statistical likelihood of the dollar maintaining its current purchasing power over the next 12 months is approaching zero. While the golden elite continue to broadcast messages of stability, their own internal data, the stuff they only discuss in closed-door sessions in Basel or Zurich, confirms that the exit door is already being crowded. By mid-2026, the global landscape will look unrecognizable to anyone who grew up in the post-1944 era. We're moving toward a bifurcated world, one side clinging to a debt-saturated, inflationary legacy system, and the other migrating to a hard-asset, blockchain-verified network that doesn't care about your faith and credit. Paint a picture of 2026 in your head. It's not a scene from a disaster movie. It's quieter, more insidious. You go to buy a tank of gas, and the price is quoted in two numbers, one in dollars and a significantly lower one in units. This isn't a hypothetical. The Kazan Protocol explicitly allows for merit-based pricing. If you're a nation or eventually a corporation trading within the unit network, you get the gold-anchored discount. If you're stuck in the legacy zone, you pay the inflation tax. We are going to see a digital divide that isn't about internet speed, but about monetary quality. The middle class in the West will find their wealth trapped in assets that are technically rising in value, homes, stocks, 401ks, while their actual ability to buy energy, food, and raw materials collapses. I know, it sounds like a nightmare, but you have to see the pattern. The life advice I have for you isn't about getting rich, it's about sovereignty. You need to build your own personal Kazan protocol. Focus on physicality. The era of paper wealth is ending. If you can't touch it, you don't own it. The golden elite are hoarding bullion for a reason. They know that when the digital dust settles, gold and silver are the only things that don't require a counterparty to be valid. Aim for at least 10 to 15% of your net worth in physical metal, not ETFs, not paper gold, but actual physical weight. Diversify the plumbing. Don't leave 100% of your liquidity in a single banking jurisdiction. Explore hard currency anchors like the Swiss franc, which is forecast to remain the most stable non-unit currency in 2026 due to its own prudent fiscal backing. Mental fortitude over market noise. Stop checking the daily price of the dollar. It's a distraction. Start tracking the gold to oil ratio. That is the real scoreboard of the new world. When gold starts buying more energy while the dollar buys less, you know the transition is accelerating. Community is the final piece of the action plan. The new system is decentralized by design, and your survival will be too. Focus on local networks, productive land, and tradable skills. In a world where the global currency is being reset, the ability to produce something of value for your neighbor becomes more liquid than a dying fiat note. The next 6 months will be a masterclass in gaslighting. They will tell you the unit is failing, that it's too complex, or that it's illegal. They said the same thing about every major shift in history right before they adopted it themselves. Don't wait for the official announcement to protect your family. The data doesn't lie, it just gets ignored until it's too late to act. Trust the patterns, not the promises. I'll see you in the comments.